At midnight in Lafourche Parish, the air has the manners of a wet hand, but that night a thin movement came off the bayou like it had been trained for church, cool enough to pretend it was kindness, strong enough to lift the Spanish moss like a curtain and show the water thinking. Cicadas sawed their same old argument into the dark. A shrimp boat groaned somewhere beyond the cane, its deck light making one pale halo that didn't care what it blessed. I was walking the shoulder of Highway 24, then 316, those numbers you only learn to say out loud after you've done something foolish. My cousin's apartment in Gray wasn't far, as the heron flies, but the heron never has to decide whether he's going to make it to sobriety before his sneakers blister. The Waffle House at the parish line wore its own sun and didn't notice night, but I did, and the night noticed me back. He rolled up in a pickup that sounded like a man trying to clear his throat in church. The truck was the faded blue of old promises, the hood still flecked with dried rain like skin after bad sun. When the high beams dimmed, his face was a ghost that had decided to be polite. He leaned across the bench and cranked the window. The belt squeaked, a little sermon about maintenance. "You need a lift?" he asked. His voice had done years on porches. Gentle, almost embarrassed for me. "Ain't right to walk in this heat. Mosquitoes got no religion after midnight." "I'm fine," I lied, a third lie, if we're counting the one I told my cousin about being all set for the night and the one I told my boss about being on the wagon again. "Where you headed?" he asked, because helpers in Louisiana always start with geography. "I'm not going far. Bayou Blue turnoff, then down a bit." "Gray," I said before I could stop my mouth. "Past the levee pumps." "I can take you to the pumps," he said. "From there, it's just your legs and the good Lord." He smiled in that tight way men smile when they want their goodness notarized. He wore a t-shirt with a festival I recognized printed on it, shrimp and petroleum, two saints we invented to explain our habits. He had that soft belly some men grow when they learn to cook for their mothers and themselves. Chicory coffee and rice. The not young shape of a man whose knees know the weather. Glasses with square frames and a small crease between the eyes that said he listened more than he talked. "You look like you're catching trouble," he said, not unkindly. Night does that to fellas with nowhere to point it. "It does," I said, and the honesty of the sentence surprised me. "Hop in," he said. I did. The bench seat wheezed under my weight like a sigh it had been saving. The cab smelled like laundry soap and a familiar sweet powder, maybe, that grandmothers keep by their sink. A rosary hung from the rear view, not like faith, like habit. The AC pushed air that had been brave earlier and was tired now. He put the truck in drive and the fan on low and merged back onto the road like a man who learns each day how to be careful without making a point of it. "What's your name?" he asked. We had not earned names. He should not have asked. I should not have answered. But men who have been lonely for too long will trade information for the illusion of a seatbelt. "Evan," I said. He nodded. "I'm Ron," he said, and he put the word down like a card he wasn't sure he wanted to play. "But you can call me R. That's what most folks do." Lights slid across his face as we passed the only billboard out there advertising a lawyer who sues storms. He kept both hands on the wheel. The radio was turned low, a Zydeco squeeze box arguing with a preacher who had not learned to be on the radio and kept clearing his throat into a microphone that was probably older than me. "You from here?" he asked. "Thibodeau," I said. "Left. Came back." I had been bleeding the truth little by little without looking down to see how much had made it to my shoes. "Folks always come back," he said. "Cypress knees trip you no matter how far you think you got." He asked me nothing else. That was the fourth lie. He didn't pry. Predators who've done the homework know how to let silence do the paperwork for them. I filled it anyway, because men who need rides from strangers also need to hear their own story out loud once in a while to see if it still makes sense. I told him about the job at the shipyard I'd left 3 months back, like it was an enterprise that left me, not the other way around. I told him the short version of the long thing I hadn't solved. Boys. How the body wants what the town doesn't bless. How you get real good at parking lots and back doors. How being seen becomes its own kind of hunger. He nodded like a man accepting a package he'd been told to expect. He didn't change the radio. He didn't lean. Hard place to be hungry, he said softly. Everybody here loves you until they don't. Yeah, I said, and that was the only truly honest word I'd said to him. The Bayou Blue turnoff arrived with the quiet authority of a classroom bell. He flicked his blinker, and we dipped into the narrow road that cuts through stands of cypress and small faiths. Crickets escalated. The ditches gathered up every star. The truck's headlamps showed us palmetto fans and the low red eyes of someone's cat, deciding whether we were a story it wanted to be in. You sure you want to go all the way to the pumps? He asked. There's a storm building back toward the lake. You feel that? He lifted a hand off the wheel and pressed his palm to the roof like he was listening through wood. Pressure changing. Ain't smart to walk into a night like that if you don't have somewhere exactly to go. I've got somewhere, I said. It's just complicated to get there. I'll text him when I'm closer. You can text from my place, he said quickly, then slowed as if he'd shown more of his plan than he meant. I got signal better than the pumps. You can sit a minute, cool off, charge up, I'll point you back out, and you'll be on your way. I watched the bayou and tried to see myself in it. I saw a boy leaning on a rail thinking the water was listening. I saw a man who had learned the water listens but doesn't take notes. I saw my reflection in the passenger window, ghosted in glass with the cypress sliding by through my face, and realized I was trying to measure whether my life fit in another man's courtesy. Just call, he said. Don't gotta go inside if you don't want. I got a long cord. You can stay in the truck and do your business. He had rehearsed this part. He had thought about men like me, the way we sit, the way we fidget when our phones die, and all we have left is the story we tell ourselves about being safe by being invisible. He had a cord. He had cold air. He had an address in the dark. He had a mother scent in the cab and a rosary that made his hands look like they belonged to someone legally kind. All right, I said, because I was tired and my legs had begun to write their own obituary. Just to call. He nodded, relieved in a way he hid with a small cough. We turned off the paved cut and onto a loop road where the parish forgets pavement belongs to everybody. Gravel wrote bigger syllables under our tires. Trailers appeared the way teeth do in a dream. Irregular, close together, each with its porch light telling its own truth about whether it was home. A dog buoyed us along with a bark that was 2/3 bravado and 1/3 honest worry. His trailer was tidy. That's the wound of it. White skirting neat as a tucked-in shirt, steps that had learned to be steps and not suggestions, a porch with a chair and a plastic fern that had the decency to be a good fake. 2 milk crates stacked into a table held a folded copy of yesterday's paper and a spray bug killer turned to stream. A ceramic frog grinned at the air like it was a joke it was saving for someone later. A window unit hummed with the steady persistence of a man who has decided his job is not to stop. He cut the engine, but left the key turned so the power outlets stayed alive. He reached a hand, palm open, no pressure, toward the console, and plucked the cord like it was a stringed instrument. He offered me the plugged end. There you go, he said. I slid my phone on and watched the blank black become a galaxy, then a logo, then the false mercy of a lock screen. The battery symbol grew a green hope. The screen pulsed with the missed calls of my cousin's worry and the thirsty texts of people who talk to you after midnight because nobody who loves themselves deeply does. I thumbed out a short message. I'm good. With a ride. Be there soon. I didn't say where. Shame likes to be the only witness. Got a bathroom? I asked. My mother raised me to ask permission in houses that aren't mine, even if the house belongs to a stranger who might have a particular interest in who I am and whether I finish the night with a name. Yeah, he said. It's my mama's asleep. He said asleep like it was a feeling he had for her, not a state. You can go quiet. It's to the right. I'll sit here. It's fine, I said. I can. You can go, he said. He summoned a smile that didn't know whether it was a permission or an order. You can wash your face. It's hot out. I'll get you a glass of water. No need, I said. Water's not need, he said. It's water. I followed him up the steps. The porch wood remembered our shoes. He opened the door with the easy wrist of a person who only ever opens his own door. The air inside was cool and smelled like dryer sheets trying their best against fried food. Two framed prints hung just inside. Lighthouses and scripture, bought as a pair in a store that sells everything Sunday. A crocheted throw had been folded into a shape that remembered the last pair of legs it had kept warm. In the corner, by a recliner, reclined farther than it should for posture, a CPAP machine hummed, its hose curling like a sleeping snake. "Bathrooms there," he said, pointing down a little hallway where linoleum hid its age. He didn't follow. He didn't block. He did nothing that could be photographed and held up later with a circle drawn around it. He moved to the kitchen and filled a glass at the sink, running the water longer than necessary to make it cold. He could not stop being a good host. In the bathroom, the mirror didn't forgive. Humidity had licked everything smooth. I looked like a man who had almost learned better. A clean towel hung on the bar. There was the smell of baby powder, the cheap kind that pretends to be talc. I ran water until the sink made its own weather and washed my face and neck, and the place men wash when they want to feel like they have washed more than they have. I looked at my phone again and watched the message show as delivered, like that meant anything useful. On the way back down the hall, a picture frame on a side table offered a boy in a skip day pose near a lake, a man behind him looking proud the way men do when they can be proud without being noticed doing it. The man in the picture was this man, younger by a thickness of time and thinner by a season of grief. On the shelf below lay a coil of nylon rope, white, new enough to make a hardware store proud. It was beside a tackle box that had never seen a boat deck in its life, the cardboard price tag still tucked under its handle. A spray bottle of bleach rested near, the label peeled exactly halfway, as if someone tested whether they liked the color beneath. "Drink," he said, when I returned to the small living room off the kitchen. He set the glass on a coaster with a seashell under resin. He sat in a chair that had been taught how to forgive weight. "Sweat like that will send your heart places you don't enjoy." I didn't sit. Neither did he point. We looked like two men practicing disagreement. "You can call from here," he said. "Better reception. The tower's like my side of the ditch." "I'll call from your porch," I said. "I don't want to wake your mama," he nodded. "You were raised right." "By a woman who remembers what it costs to be wrong," I said. We stood in that small room for a long minute, the way two men stare at a spade in a shed and decide whether they're about to do the same work. The CPAP hissed quietly, the weight of sleeping lungs. The bug light on the porch hummed a lullaby using only one note. The refrigerator coughed, apologized, and continued. "You can stay a bit," he said, conversational, as if a storm had arrived since we walked in, and I might have noticed it if I had been paying better attention. "I got a couch. It's clean. Your friend ain't going to open his door at this hour unless he owes you something you shouldn't collect." "I've slept on worse couches," I said, which was another way of saying I want to leave. He looked at my hands. People always look at your hands when they need to predict what you'll do next without looking like they're predicting. He put his own palms out like a man about to pray. "I don't like mess," he said. "Don't like scenes. Not in my house." "I don't either," I said, though a scene would have been a friend. "You can have a shower if you want," he said. "I'll give you a t-shirt, shorts. Heat like this makes a person forgive a stranger quick." "I'm good," I said. "Thanks." "Water," he said again. I took the glass because refusing water in South Louisiana feels like the kind of sin a preacher remembers from the pulpit. I didn't drink. He smiled without his eyes. "Some fellas," he said, kindness poured on the sentence like gravy, "like to make things dirty before they got to be clean. You ain't that, I can tell." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you want to go to your friend and knock while it's still a night you can explain," he said. "It means you don't want to owe me nothing. That's okay. I don't need your thanks to know I did right." He grinned then, small, a secret shared with himself, and looked at the coil of rope like a man looks at a chore he intends to do later when the sun agrees. He reached for the bleach bottle the way a man checks if the lid is tight before putting it away. He put it away. "Let me walk you out," he said. "It's uneven on those stairs." I walked ahead of him because I am not fully stupid. The porch light washed us both in that particular yellow that makes everyone look like a cousin. The frog watched. The truck waited, as if it had been told to remain by a man in uniform. A dog barked once and then thought better of it. The air smelled like the first 15 minutes of rain before it has the decency to arrive. "Hold up," he said, and his voice changed just enough to announce an invisible line we had crossed without knowing. "You got something on your shirt." I looked down, the old reflex. His hand moved in. A white loop of nylon turned into the word bracelet by a man who had practiced more than I like thinking about. I stepped back before he could ask my hands to become a project. He let the rope hang like a mistake. He smiled with patience. "You tense," he said softly. "It's okay. Some boys breathe easier with a rule or two." "My rules are, they don't do rope," I said, my mouth catching up to my body. He nodded slowly, as if I had said something intelligent at a meeting he ran. "We can do without," he said, and put the rope down on the porch table like a snake too tired to protest. He kept his palms up and away from me, showing me his lines. The nostrils flared that quarter-inch men get when their plan learns a new word. "I'll get you back to the road," he said. "Ain't nothing to it." I should have left then, jogged stupid toward the pumps, and banged on the firehouse door like a man who has decided to be embarrassing to live. I didn't. Tired men do too much arithmetic. I followed him to the truck because it was easy, because it was right there, because the Waffle House had trained me that neon is the same thing as safety. We slid in. He turned the key. The radio restarted mid-song. A singer who was trying to forgive a mistake he enjoyed too much to call a mistake. The AC coughed cool. He backed down his packed shell drive and turned the nose of the truck toward the parish road. "You're a good one," he said. "Not many left want to make it neat." "Neat is not the same as safe," I said, the words arriving in my mouth with someone else's handwriting on them. He chuckled, honest, almost delighted. "I know," he said, "but it helps with sleep." We rolled slow down the loop, the trailer lights passing like yard altars. He stopped once to let a cat decide we were not an emergency. He signaled at an intersection that did not require it. You could have filmed him and put the footage in a training video called How to Be Gentle. My chest was the size of a closed fist. My body had started writing questions. My head had not learned how to ask. At the last bend before the main road, he slowed more than necessary and aimed the truck toward a darker finger of shadow. Another trailer sat back from the loop. No light, no fern, just a square in the dark and the suggestion of a porch. The ditch before it was spanned by a short wooden bridge that had forgotten it wanted to be wood and begun wanting to be a story people told each other about things that used to hold. "My mama's friend," he said, picking an explanation like fruit. "She's sick. I run and check on her some nights." "I thought you were taking me to the pumps," I said. "I am," he said. "I'm just going to see if her porch light's on. If it ain't, I call her in the morning." He turned the wheel. The bridge made a noise like a joke no one laughed at. He parked where the truck wouldn't be seen from the loop. He cut the engine. It was not a trap you could draw as a diagram later and feel smart. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small gestures that had made me feel like I was being escorted home by a man who had memorized Holmes' grammar. "I'll be 2 ticks," he said, and then he reached into the space between us and plucked my keys from my knee, my palm, I don't know, like a magician revealing the coin was never behind my ear. I hadn't seen him take them. He must have read my pockets when I washed my hands, when my eyes were where he'd encouraged them to be. He held the keys up between 2 fingers, playful. "You'll be here when I get back," he said, as if we had invented a game. In my mouth, mud. In my chest, a small bird that picked one rib and said mine. "I'm good," I said, a useless phrase that deserved to be taken out back and given last rites. He pocketed the keys. He opened his door. "If you want to stretch your legs, don't fall in the ditch," he said mildly, as if the ditch were a misbehaving child we were both fond of. He stepped out. The night took him back like a favorite story, a man-shaped absence given to a trailer-shaped dark. I could have run then. I could have crawled out the passenger side and ripped my shin on the soft metal of the glove compartment and belly crawled into the ditch and let the water and the grass put their fingers through my hair and found the loop road and used the wet stink as a cloak. I did not. He came around to my side and opened my door and handed me something I did not want, his trust. "Come on," he said. "You can stand a minute. We'll go. I'll wait in the truck, I said. Suit yourself, he said, and there it was, the first edge. He tilted his head like a man listening for rain. You're a neat boy. I like that. Makes it easy. Easy for what? I asked. For leaving it better than I found it, he said, and smiled at his own cleanliness. You don't need me to tell you what his eyes had in them then. You've seen that sermon before. On the news, in a courtroom, in the Sunday whispers about men we thought were good at casseroles. He believed himself. He believed in mercy, his word for a hand around a throat that thinks it's a pillow. He believed he had an application on file with God and that the answer would be approved. The door behind the dark porch opened then, just a crack, and a rectangle of light made a small quilt on the dirt. A woman's voice, thin with cigarettes and the long night of suns, called Ron. Not like a prayer, like a warning. I'm coming, he said, and then to me, very softly so the night had to lean close to hear it. Don't go wandering. Boys get lost out here and keep walking into the same story until it eats them. He stepped into the light. The door swallowed him whole. I sat very still. The truck made ticking noises as the engine cooled, those tiny contracts metal signs with heat and regret. My phone buzzed with a where. Where you at? That sounded like a friend trying not to sound like an accusation. The keys weren't in the ignition. They were somewhere else, in his pocket, in my own stupidity. The ditch took a small breath. A frog practiced his solo and changed his mind. A mosquito found my ankle and asked for blood using a straw. I thought of his rope, of the bleach bottle with the label half peeled, of the clean bathroom and the towel that had not yet met a man like me, of the CPAP hiss and the way the air had felt like order more than mercy, of the way he had not asked my last name, of the way he had said we in the truck, we as a leash. I made a sound then that was not brave, not even useful, just a little laugh like a cough with manners. Out loud, to no one, I said, neat is not the same as safe. It didn't make me braver, it made me tired. When he came back, he didn't slam the door or grin too wide. He just was there, with my keys in his right hand and the rope in his left, both held carefully like baby birds he intended to teach to sing. 2 minutes, he said, which men say when they mean there is no time here except the kind I own. Stand up. I didn't. He sighed, disappointed in me, not angry. Anger is messy. Disappointment is a system. We're going to be tidy, he said, and the we was not a mistake. He reached in, sudden and neat. The rope went around one wrist and then the other with a speed that had learned 1,000 tiny compromises. He didn't pull hard. He didn't have to. He made my hands remember school, fingers together, palms polite. He put a loop around my ankle like he was measuring for a suit. He did it the way some men tie shoes for kids, serious, practiced, patient with the idea that everyone involved would learn something if they kept their mouths quiet. Breathe, he said, and the word sounded like an order. Please, I said. I'm going to help, he said. You look tired. The rope's language is older than any English we pretend is ours. It says no more efficiently than almost anything on earth. My muscles heard it and started to negotiate. I let my body go all the way soft, a choice that feels like wrongness until it feels like math. If he wanted a boy who fought, he wasn't going to get one. If he wanted a boy who obeyed, he was going to get one who obeyed badly. He stood there with my keys and my quiet and his rope and the night and did what he always did. I know this because I learned his pattern later, because I listened to the tape of his voice while a bench of men with straight ties tried not to look like they wanted to scrub the table after he left. He talked about peace. He talked about sleep. He talked about bodies like he had asked permission to talk about them this way and had been granted a written waiver. He promised no pain in a tone that didn't care if I believed him. Okay, I said, and made my voice walk toward a place that sounded like trust. He relaxed a half-inch. That half-inch belongs to me. I need the bathroom, I said, and kept my voice sweet as if I were asking a waitress for ketchup. Here, he said, and gestured at the dark trailer. You can go inside. Won't nobody wake. Outside, I said. I get sick when I get tied. The wires get crossed. I got asthma if I panic. The lie had so much truth to stand on it didn't wobble. I'll make a mess in your truck. He hates mess, he had told me. He hates scenes. He told me that too. His nostrils did that flare again, half-inch wide this time. He looked at the ditch. He looked at my face. He looked at his own neat hands. "Okay," he said, because that's what neatness says when it is afraid of the bigger stain. He took my arm, not rough, not even insistent, and guided me out of the truck onto the crunchy shoulder. The ditch waited, water like a whisper you can't quite make out. Crickets wrote a paragraph. He stood a respectful distance away, like a deacon who offers privacy at a graveside and then does not look down. He watched anyway, hands at his sides, rope a leash he thought had turned into friendship. "Down there," he said. "Mind the snakes." I shuffled toward the ditch. The rope around my wrists made this part slow enough to embarrass a saint. At the lip, I bent like a man resigning himself to his own decisions and let gravity nudge me into a crouch. The grass brushed my calves with a sound that might have been a laugh if I were feeling mean. The water smelt like lily rot and old sun. Mosquitoes had found a small party on my ankle and did not send regrets. "Okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Give me a second." The second is what this whole thing is about. People think escape is a door opening or a gun going click or a scream. It's not. It's a second you grow with your hands tied in somebody else's yard. I dug my toe into the mud like a boy trying to draw with his shoe and found a bottle there. Plastic, half buried, the top pressed through by roots, its neck a small mouth. I made a noise like retching. I leaned farther like the ditch had decided to adopt me. He took a half step closer, not enough to say help. Enough to say I see. I jammed the bottleneck between my ankles and turned my feet. Not a lever, not a trick you can teach, just friction, just stubbornness. The rope at my ankles gave the way cheap rope gives when it had been tied by a man who had decided tonight would be easy. The loop loosened by not much. Enough to let me place one foot in front of the other instead of side by side, like a fool standing for the national anthem. "I'm going to pass out," I said, and let my shoulders go slack, all my weight pooling in the crook of my knees, head bowed into the ditch like I had a prayer I had forgotten the words to. He came in then, one careful step, the way men do when they think dignity is a casserole you serve later. He reached to steady my shoulder, not to squeeze. He went kind. Neat men go kind when they think kindness will save the rug. I twisted, just a little, and let my weight do what weight does. We went into the ditch together, not far, enough to soak his shoes, enough to embarrass the bottom of his pants. He hissed, surprised, and made a small offended noise that told me more about his religion than anything he'd said in the truck. "Careful," he said sharply. "Sorry," I said, just as sharp, and then I did the only rude thing I had the energy to do. I yelled, not a scream for the news cameras. A hey, the kind of hey you hear behind a bar when a fight is about to make everyone go outside. The dark porch that had swallowed him earlier coughed up a light again, and the thin woman with the cigarette voice said, "Who?" like she had the right to ask. "Back in the truck," he breathed, furious at me for inviting witnesses. I went, limp and fast at the same time. He didn't push, he aimed. He put me back in my seat with the tenderness of a man placing groceries. He reached for the rope to retitty my ankles. I tucked my feet under me and made them a shape he could not comment on without admitting to himself what we were doing. He sighed, the way men sigh when the lesson they thought they were going to teach meets a student with her own chalk. He started the engine. He reversed, the bridge groaning again like an old man being asked to dance. He turned back toward the loop and then to the road that led to the pumps like he had promised. He drove with his jaw locked to keep a sermon in his mouth. We passed a house where a porch light blinked because the switch was cheap, not because anyone had touched it. We passed a ditch where an egret had parked itself on one leg and decided it was smarter than everyone. We passed a sign that told us we were welcome and meant it. "The thing about boys like you," he said finally, conversational as a weatherman, "is you make every part hard that didn't have to be." "I'm not a boy," I said, heat arriving behind my eyes like a storm that had decided to let me be its address. And none of this had to be. He ignored that, or he filed it for later when he could make it a story about a boy who wanted dignity while he was being saved. When the pumps came into view, the big skeletons that gulp down the water and fling it over the levee like somebody else's problem, he slowed. That was the first time I believed he might actually do as he'd promised and let me out. You shouldn't believe men like him when they do the right thing briefly. They write it down later and bring it to God like a receipt. See? He pulled into the gravel under the sodium lamps that pretend to be moons. The parish building sat squat and blank like a man with his arms folded. He stopped. He took the rope off my wrists. He put the coil in the glove box. He set my keys on my knee and placed his hand over them like a blessing. "You want to walk?" he asked. "Or you want me to bring you all the way?" "Here is good," I said. He nodded, disappointed in me for not asking him to be my hero. I got out. I stood in that reverse daylight that makes roaches think they own the ground. I put my keys in my pocket like I didn't need them at all. The levee pumps whispered their hydraulic hallelujah, water doing what it's told. The air came at me clean, like somebody else's shirt. I looked at him, at his glasses, at the crease between his eyes, at the hands that wanted rope and wrote mercy, at the truck that asked for tune-ups and got them, at the man who had not raised his voice to me but had been ready to take my breath. "Thank you for the ride," I said, and it was the rudest thing I could think to say. "Don't be foolish," he said. "Boys like you walk into ditches and drown." "I didn't," I said. He tightened his hand on the wheel. The rosary swayed, a small prayer to accidents. He nodded once, like we had concluded a negotiation neither of us wanted to have to start. He put the truck in drive. He left, neat, slow, without dust, like a story I made up. I walked toward the pumps, up the service road, over the little metal ladder that made my body flinch because ladders always remember the last time somebody fell. Down the levee, toward the lights of gray, toward the dark apartment where my cousin had sworn he'd leave the door unlocked if he fell asleep, and I could slip in and breathe by the window and watch the pumps blink and pretend they were stars. Behind me, for a while, I heard the truck in the distance, the sound of a throat clearing, polite. Then I didn't. The night closed around that absence and put a fern on it so you wouldn't trip. I didn't call the police. That's a sentence I would like to make smaller, but I can't. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't high. I just didn't know yet how not to be the kind of man who says thank you to a story that tried to keep his name. I slept 3 hours on my cousin's couch and woke to the compulsive quiet of a house that has agreed ahead of time not to say anything excited. I texted "I'm good" again to nobody who asked. I took a shower that smelled like somebody else's body wash. I watched the pumps until I felt like I was the one moving the water. Days later, after the news broke, the words Bayou, Blue, Strangled, Ditch, Levee Road, a litany with a tune you don't get to forget. I sat with myself on that same levee slope and tried not to be a man who could tell you the difference between neat and safe too perfectly. The second lie was that I would forget. People will walk up to you in grocery stores and at wakes and on porches with high opinions of their own questions. They will say, "How did you know?" They will ask, "What was the moment?" You can spend a year trying to think of a single thing you can print on a t-shirt and hand to people who like to feel prepared. And the truth is, it's never a moment. It's a braid you didn't know you were weaving until it holds. But if you make me pick, it wasn't the rope. It wasn't seeing the bleach or the CPAP, even though the hiss of that machine has come to me in night dreams like a snake that believes in medicine. It was the tone a grown man uses when he says "we" about your body. That "we" is a leash people make out of words. I've had nicer leashes, but that one gripped. After his arrest, Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes became a rumor mill with good sources. The radio ran a relay race with itself. Channel 4 burned through adjectives. Deputies spoke into microphones the way men do when a thing is bigger than their tongues and their ties. He'd been caught, they said. A man with a neat yard and a sensible truck and a light at his porch that said folks were welcome until they weren't. He told them where he'd left the boys. Nobody went looking for, because this place teaches us to mind our business, and some of us survive by taking that lesson all the way into our bones. I called. A detective called me back. He used my first name like he'd known it longer than the file had. He asked for a time. He asked me to bring what I could remember like it was the junk in a drawer my mother told me to empty. We met in a room with scuffed linoleum and a whiteboard that had learned 5 permanent shades of gray. He turned on a recorder that said Tascam on its little metal face. He folded his hands on the table like a pastor tired from funerals. "Start where you start," he said. "I don't like being a witness," I said, and he smiled without humor. "Nobody does," he said. "That's why you do it once, and we write fast." I told him the night like it was counting: the shoulder, the truck, the rope, the porch, the woman's voice in the other trailer, the ditch, the pumps, the way the word tidy can be a murder weapon if it falls into the wrong mouth. He asked me to describe the rope. I told him white nylon, new enough to think it had a future. He asked for the smell of the house. I said dryer sheets and Sunday cooking. He asked me what he said most. I told him we and sleep and help. He asked me if I thought he was going to hurt me. "I think he was going to make it neat," I said, and watched the detective write neat slowly, as if the letters had teeth. He asked me what made me think I was a maybe and not a definitely in his plans. It was a poor question. The answer tasted like cheap coffee. "He likes boys with fewer neighbors," I said. "Boys whose phones nobody calls." I told him I had someone waiting at the levee. It was a lie that put a little camera in his head. He wanted to remain a man people don't say the loud thing about in front of the cashier at Rouse's. I breathed, slow. Also, I asked to be sick in his ditch. He's particular. He hates mess. The detective's pen hovered. He looked older above the eyes then, like he'd been moving a heavy box up a flight of stairs for 20 years. "We found bleach," he said. "I know," I said. "You know?" "I saw it," I said. "Not the way you need me to say I saw it, but I saw it." He nodded, steepled his fingers, looked at the recorder like it was a cat he needed to appease. "He's talking now," he said carefully. "A lot. Men like him write their own verses and then go through them out loud for the applause. He remembers some. He says he doesn't remember you, that he did a lot of good turns without charging for them, and we shouldn't be counting every ride he gave as a crime." "You shouldn't," I said, "but you should count the rope." He half smiled. "We are." He told me a number then, bigger than I was prepared for even after the radio had auditioned a few. He told me bodies that had been found and names that had been forgotten and ditches that God had known about the whole time. He told me men, my age, younger, older, all of them made small in the telling because they were dead, and we don't let our throats hold the true shape of the lost when it makes a mess of breakfast. He asked me if I would testify if it came to that. I said yes, before the part of me built by bad nights could ask what for. He played me his voice, mine, the man from the truck, not the detective. Later, when the case became what cases become when numbers are large enough to get a special segment and a small line of live stream commenters who make jokes, we all should be court-ordered to scrub out of our phones before we sleep. I listened to the way he said boys and help and mama. He made his mother a shield. So many boys learn that trick from us. He talked about pity like it had been sanctified by the parish council. He made gods of ditches. He made mercy an occupation. He made sleep sound like he was asking me for a dance. On the stand, later, yes, there was a stand. Yes, I wore a shirt with buttons and a tie that made me think thoughts about my father I do not owe you. Nobody allowed me to say tidy as many times as the night demanded. They asked how I got in his truck, and I said I got in because I am not a man with $10 in ones who can call a cab at a parish line. They asked why I stayed, and I said because polite is a disease down here, and I have been sick with it my whole life. They asked what he held, and I said rope and keys and we. They asked if he hurt me, and I said not the way you can see. He pled to enough to make the numbers do something like justice. He took life until life was a spreadsheet. The paper printed a picture where he looked like a man who could stand behind you at a gas station choosing a scratch-off. He wrote himself letters in a tidy hand. He used the word mercy so frequently, the ink started to perform it. He told the story of himself like he was the only one who could be trusted with the facts. Down here, bodies are always stories. Men go missing, and people say he went to Texas with the tone of a mother politely asking you not to bring this up at her table. Boys get found, and a parish learns to pronounce the word ligature without moving their lips. I kept living, a rude sentence, but I've earned it. I took a job in a warehouse where the air is honest about what it's carrying. I learned to keep cash for an Uber in my sock, even if I plan to keep every promise I made myself at noon. I still walk shoulders because I am a person who likes to feel the ditch and the road arguing on either side of my ankles. I just pick shoulders with porch lights near enough to make me a liar if I said I was alone. Sometimes I dream about his house, tidy as a boy's haircut. I stand on the porch and look at the frog and the fern and the bleaching bottle with its peeled label. I hear the CPAP hiss like something that is supposed to save you after you stop breathing. And in the dream, I turn all the lights on and step into the yard and yell, "Hey!" the way I did by the ditch, and every trailer door opens at once, and women and men and the kids who have learned not to look come out and stand like a choir that has already decided to sing the hard verse. Sometimes I sit on the levee by the pumps and count how long it takes the sodium lights to go from white to nothing when the parish turns them off at dawn. The water makes a sound that I think I hear in my bones now. If I could give it a sentence, it would be keep moving. Not poetry, a command. One afternoon, near my cousin's place, I saw his truck again. Not his, a twin, a cousin, a tragedy in coincidence. Blue worn down by the same sun, a rosary even. The man driving had a different life in his face. He waved and offered a ride as I was pulling sacks of groceries up the stairs. My hands thought about saying yes before my mouth got the veto. "I'm good," I said. He nodded. "Men down here don't pry. If I'm good comes with the eye contact. That means I know something you don't want to know." He drove off slow, like a man who had never hurt anyone and wouldn't know how to start, and I went upstairs and put rice and red beans in their jars. Did I tell my mother? No. She would have made of it a thing that lived in her house and slept in my old room and had to be prayed around. Did I tell my cousin? Yes. He listened through his fingers like a boy who had learned to hold a cigarette and a secret at the same time. He said, "You're lucky, because men do that, because it makes numbers feel like they can be contained. Luck is a drunk you don't bring home. I don't traffic in him anymore." The parish has a habit of swallowing. Cain grows tall and says, "Look at me," and then gets cut flat and says, "Forget it." Water rises, and the pumps throw it over. Men do harm in small rooms, and the rooms forgive them because neighbors want to go to sleep with the confidence that everybody knows everybody. We don't. I didn't know him until I did. I don't know which boys he spoke to that believed him and slept. I only know my ditch and the frog and the woman's voice that had just enough warning in it to count. I work nights now, by choice, in a warehouse that has learned a fan is also a religion. I carry a box cutter and a whistle and a phone that I charge like prayer. I call strangers Sir less. I let Rude shoulder in and sit on my couch and put its feet on my coffee table and say, "We're doing this my way." When men use "we" about my body, I say, "You mean you," and then I find a door. I vet porches. I don't forgive rope. There's a story people tell about our parishes that the bayou listens. That if you stand quiet enough in the right place and fix your eye on one particular cypress, you can hear all the names the water has been asked to keep. I have stood there. I have listened. The water is too busy. We've asked it to do so much. It moves what we put into it. It doesn't hold it so we don't have to. It is not our filing cabinet. It is our mirror. This is what I would tell the next boy walking the shoulder under cicadas, the next man who thinks the levee pumps sound like safety, the next me. You don't have to be polite to live. If a stranger says "we" about your body, untie the sentence from your wrist and throw it in the ditch. If a man with a tidy porch says you look tired, believe him and then walk anyway. If the night offers you a breeze, say liar and keep moving. If you're going to ask for help, pick the porch with too many wind chimes and a woman with her eyebrows already up. If you must get in a truck, keep your own keys in a pocket you don't brag about. And if you find yourself standing on a bridge that complains when you cross it, and a man who smells like dryer sheets and a life lived in small schedules says 2 minutes, mishear him, make it no. How am I doing now? Well, I keep cash in my sock. I count "we" like alarms, and I only take rides from houses with 3 porch lights and a neighbor who watches. Killer reveal, Ronald Joseph Dominique, the Bayou Strangler. Ronald Dominique, born 1964, preyed on vulnerable men across Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes, Louisiana, between the late 1990s and 2006. Often presenting himself as a harmless helper, he lured victims with offers of rides, cash, or a place to stay, then overpowered and strangled them, typically at his trailer, dumping bodies along canals, ditches, and rural roads. Arrested in November 2006, Dominique confessed in detail and ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple murders to avoid the death penalty, receiving consecutive life sentences. Linked to 23 killings, he is among Louisiana's most prolific serial murderers, notable for exploiting hospitality, routine, and perceived invisibility along the Bayou corridor.